Hi, welcome to the World Book Day edition. And today we're going to be sharing with you some of my favorite books for learning English. I get lots of requests from people asking, hey, what books should I buy? What books should I read? That's the important part. Not what books you should buy, but what books you should actually read and use if you want to improve your English skills. Reading is a really important component if you really are a serious learner of English. Too many people think if I speak more, I'm going to speak better. No, it's not exactly true. If you read more, you will speak better. If you listen more, you will speak better. Because there are two skills in English, two sets of skills, the receptive skills and the transmission skills. Speaking and writing are transmission skills. Reading and listening are the receptive skills, but you need to improve your receptive skills if you want to improve your transmission skills, because otherwise you don't have much to transmit. It limits your vocabulary, it limits your fluency if you do not have a lot in here, which you only get by reception. World Book Day has been announced as April 24th by the United Nations. So here we are with some of my favorite books. But before I get started, I want to share with you a little story from my childhood. I read somewhere that a father very wisely would lock up the bookcase and put the key somewhere that he told the children was a secret location. In fact, it wasn't a secret location. He told them where it was, but he told them that they should never use the key to open the bookcase when he left the house. And years later, of course, when a parent tells you not to do something, you will do it. These children opened the bookcase whenever he left the house, and they would quickly read a book before he got back. And over the years, they read the entire bookcase. Yeah, every time the father went out, they would go sneak a look into this very important library. It had a lock and key. It meant that the books were very important. And I thought this was a great story. And then I reflected. My father did the same thing to us as kids. We had a bookcase in the living room. He had a lock and key on it. He had it hidden, not hidden, but he had it put in a little, it was actually a little ceramic doll. He put the key in there. And we used to sneak a look into the bookcase for the books. And we got a lot out of it. And all three of the brothers who grew up in Canada, we all love books. We have huge libraries because he developed this love for books. So I hope that for you can actually develop the same love of books. So whether you love books or not, you still need books to improve your English skills. So here's my recommended list. But before I start, I need to give you a little bit of background of how I think and how I select my books. The first book I'm going to introduce you to is a very, I think, innovative and kind of unusual kind of book. First, I want to tell you it's a book you shouldn't try to memorize. Most people, a lot of my students, they buy books and they try to memorize the book. It's not really a practical way, and it doesn't really make it useful. You need to find ways to make the thing useful. And my approach to teaching English is based on this book. The approach is called the Lexical Approach. This approach was developed in the early 1990s. But unfortunately, it wasn't really widely accepted in the English teaching community, but it's a very valid and very useful approach. It's not a method, it's an approach. And the approach simply says we should teach people things that are commonly used. We shouldn't just randomly choose things. Okay, what to say when you go to the hospital? What do you say when you go to the hotel? You may never go to a hospital, so what use is that? So what they did is they started correlating records and discovering what words were the most used, what phrases are the most used. So we learned to use those phrases first. And they also found that word combinations, word pairs, commonly used phrases, which are called collocations, were the easiest way to memorize, or I should say to learn, to use sentences, use them in actual usage. And so this is the approach. And as this approach improved, in the late 1990s, there was a university, they started compiling lists of commonly used words and phrases for the previous year by scanning newspapers and books and documents. They found out what the most used words in the English language were, and they started publishing lists. So it became more and more sophisticated. By the way, this was the University of Birmingham in England, with one of the publishers, Collins Publishers. They developed what they call the Bank of English. It's a very, very interesting idea. So this book is called Natural Grammar. And this, again, uses the same approach. Natural grammar talks about how we use words in collocations. So, for example, one word, even a simple word like door, has many phrases attached to it. So we say open the door, close the door is ajar. Many, many phrases that we use with the word door. And if we know more of those phrases from frequency, the better chance we have of learning it and listening for it, and the better chance we have of understanding and then being able to use it in everyday conversation and writing, or however we need to use it. So that makes perfect sense. So this is called Natural Grammar, and it's very well written. Again, it's not a book you want to buy and try to memorize. It's a book you buy and you scan through it and you kind of put a little bit in your head and you read it again and you scan it and put it again. You know, multiple reading is the way to get it in here. You know, it's been scientifically proven. You just read a book one time, it doesn't go in. Repetition is the mother of skill. So if you read something 5 to 6 to 7 times, it starts to sink in. Also, it has to do with our belief system. Sometimes we read something and we don't believe it. The second time we read it, we say, oh, maybe there's some truth in that. The third time, we kind of say, maybe he's saying something I should remember. Fourth time, you're saying, hey, this is pretty good stuff. The fifth time, you're saying, it's starting to go in. And the sixth time, you're going, I know how to use it. So repetition is the mother of skill, and you need to read books like this. It's really a reference book, and you can really learn a lot. And again, the more natural way to learn a language is with repetition. You did that as a baby. You heard things over and over and over and over again. That's why it got stuck in your brain. So from that approach, we also have a series of books. Again, see, this is a book. This is English Course. And it's by Collins Publishers. And these are the guys, like I said, they developed the Bank of English. They did many things on the Lexical Approach and are still doing it. And it's written by a couple, Jane and Dave Willis. Very professional book. Very, very well written. I'm not showing you this book and telling you that you should necessarily get it. This is a book for teachers. This is the student's book. But they've written many books on how to learn English, why you need to use English to learn English, because many of you learned English using your native language, and that was also not a good idea because you're doing this translation all the time. And so that's very important. Try to learn English in English if you can. It's much more useful, and you will learn much faster. Although at the beginning you'll say, I don't understand anything the teacher's saying, but over time you'll get better, and you'll understand more English and more English and more English. The next one is just a fun book, and this is, again, not this book in particular. This is a book called The Secret Life of Words, and this is a fun book. So people who read a lot, they come across words, and me anyway, I always wonder, how did that word come into the English language? And the history of words is always a very interesting subject for me. And so I have many, many books. I have maybe 15 or 20 books on the history of English words. You know, for example, the other thing I like is every year the different sources publish the most popular word of the year. You know, for example, in the year 2005, the most popular word, the most used word in the English language was flexitarian. So a flexitarian is not a vegetarian, and he's not a meat eater. He's not a carnivore. He's in the middle. He's mostly vegetarian, but occasionally he has meat. It's called a flexitarian. That's a new word, 2005. But it was the most used word in the English language in 2005. Another example, which I like because it relates to the area where I live, Hong Kong, Macau, and China, the very common phrase, and the first time I heard it, I got it in an email maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I was entering a contest, and someone on the email to me said, Herbert, add oil. And I was like, what is add oil? What is add oil? And I found out later it's a very common expression in Hong Kong, Macau, maybe China, ga yao. It means add oil. And what it means is put more effort in, work a little harder, add oil. And the history of it is really interesting because apparently it comes from some village where they had no electricity, and the children, when they wanted to do their homework and study, had to use a kerosene lamp. And when they ran out of the oil, the kerosene oil, they had to stop studying. So a man went around the village adding oil, giving people oil so that they could read longer. Add oil. Very interesting history of a word. And you never forget a word when you know the story behind it. My final recommendation for today, if you're doing any amount of writing, this is absolutely my favorite book for writing. And this is, to me, even though I have other books on writing, this is what I call probably the definitive guide to writing. It's E.B. White and Strunk. So Strunk and White wrote this book. It's called The Elements of Style. It was written a long time ago, 50 or 60 years ago. They keep coming up with new revisions. I think the grandson or the great-grandson of E.B. White is now the editor. It's now the 11th edition. So get the most up-to-date edition because the older editions, the English sounds a little bit dated. But again, this is a book you want to have on your desk when you're writing. It's not a book, again, you want to memorize. It's not a book of rules or grammar. It's really advice on how to be a clear writer. And I highly recommend this book. The other book, if you want to get it, is called The Art of Plain Talk. It's by Rudolf Flesch. And Rudolf Flesch wrote many books, The Art of Plain Writing, The Art of Plain Talk. Many titles are plain, okay? And I found, this is another interesting thing about language. After the Chinese Revolution in 1949, China adopted a system of learning and using Chinese called Putonghua. And Putonghua means plain language or simple language. What's really interesting is in the world at that time there was what they called the plain English movement. You can go online and check this. From about 1950 to about 1957, this was a big deal to simplify language, simplify the English language. It has had a resurgence maybe in the last 5 years. Now they're trying to teach lawyers and accountants and just about everybody else, learn to write plain, learn to write simple. Don't use long words and make it convoluted and highfalutin. You need to really make it simple so everyone can understand what they read. So those are my recommendations today for you. Leave your comments if you have a favorite book. And enjoy reading and enjoy World Book Day. Bye for now.